Hearing our president give his State of the Union address makes me daydream. What would I say if I could set the agenda?
Thank you. Thank you.
The State of the Union is one of those actions of government that is actually required by the Constitution. Presidents use it to give their vision of where America should go.
The state of our union
is strong,
and together we will make it stronger.
But do they tell the truth? My favorite quote from State of the Union addresses I've heard is this one.
The era of big government is over.
He said that. Congress applauded. But the next year they increased spending by $9 billion, $42 billion after that. And today they spend more than $1 trillion more than they spent the year big government ended. Republicans often promise cuts.
This federal government is too big
and it spends too much money.
They said that, and then they increased spending.
In fact, the best thing we could do on taxes for all Americans is to simplify the individual tax code.
That would be good, but did he actually mean it? Will it happen? Tonight, my all-star panel of libertarians will respond to the president. And then,
I want to give you my report on the State of the Union. We're in deep trouble.
It's the libertarian State of the Union. That's our show tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
God bless you, and
God bless
The United States of America.
And now, John Stossel.
Good evening and welcome to this special live edition of Stossel. Much of the coverage of tonight's State of the Union has been Republicans and Democrats giving their spin. Will this help Obama and the Democrats? Will it help the Republicans? I don't care. Instead, I've assembled some of the smartest people I know to debate whether Obama's suggestions or Paul Ryan's advance prosperity or liberty. Because isn't that what's most important? Our audience tonight is mostly college students, many of whom are already smart enough to call themselves libertarians. Not all, but I'm working on them. Thank you for coming. And you're in luck tonight because my first guest is probably America's most prominent libertarian, Congressman and former presidential candidate Ron Paul. So, Dr. Paul, did you see anything, hear anything tonight you liked?
Not really. I mean, I think every one of these speeches are very similar. You know, they've been talking about cutting back for years, like you indicated in your opening, but I heard nothing there that would get me excited. I didn't hear where the cuts would be. I heard that there would be new programs, not less programs, and that there would probably be more taxes too. And then they won't even come close to dealing with the deficit. When he talks about cutting, at one point he talked about cutting $400 billion after 5 years or so. Heck, we increased the national debt last year by $1.7 trillion. So they're not even talking about it. They're throwing things out here to try to reassure the people. But there's nothing going to reassure the people until we have a healthy economy. And
well, the president may have been trying to reassure the people, but Paul Ryan seemed pretty dire. He talked about bankruptcy and we're at a tipping point. You're right, he wasn't very specific, but yeah. You're not impressed by his speech either?
Oh, well, no, I think he's very sincere, and I think he would move it in a different fashion, but I keep thinking about, you know, where are the words when we have the clout? We don't have any clout. The House has a little more clout now, but, you know, we argue, the Republicans have argued that we don't need Obamacare, so we vote in the House to get rid of Obamacare, but it's not going to go into Senate, and the president's not going to do that. So, but, you know, when we had a better chance, and this is the frustration of the libertarians, is, you know, we hear libertarian-like ideas from Republicans, but, you know, the Republicans had the House and the Senate and the presidency, but government expanded massively and deficits exploded. So this is why the people get cynical
But wait a second, I don't want to be cynical. I'm assuming this is a new group. They've wised up. They're at least talking to my ear more about cuts. The president in terms of specific cuts, proposes to freeze non-defense discretionary spending.
Yeah, we always hope they'll cut, but you have to cut discretionary spending too. You have to cut everything. But you know what?
That's only 19% of the budget.
Yeah, maybe less than that. See, I don't think that all this talk has much meaning, because I don't think they're talking about the right thing. They're talking about a budget, which is very important, and I don't vote for any of the spending, so I think there's too much spending. But I think it's what do people expect from government. As long as we have this philosophic acceptance of that we're to be the policemen of the world, we're to have a welfare state from cradle to grave, that we're involved in delivery of medical care for everybody that needs it, free education for everybody, you just can't please people. That you're always going to have the pressure to spend. So it is much bigger than the budget. It's whether or not we want to change the role of government. We have to ask, what should the role of government be in a free society? That is, if we want to live in a free society. If we want to live in a free society.
The Republican Study Committee has proposed $2.5 trillion in cuts over the next 10 years. You impressed by that?
Not hardly. I mean, if I want to cut that in 1 year, you know. But then they say the end of the world would come if you did that. But what if you did these cuts that libertarians would like? But what if you got rid of the income tax at the same time? Wouldn't this release a tremendous amount of energy if everybody knew that they had no more taxes to pay, no more income? You know, boy, people would be willing to work and save and invest and everything else.
But as
President
Obama said, we can't leave the poor and the weak in the lurch, and that would do that.
Yeah, but the more they try, the more the poor they get. I mean, the more you try to help people who don't have, you know, these programs, the worse the problems get. So yes, they grab the moral high ground by saying that, but I've argued for years that if you're a true humanitarian, you have to be a libertarian. You have to believe in liberty and freedom and the market and property rights. And then, you know, this will really help the people. We've been the freest nation in the world, and we've been the most prosperous. But we've given up on this. When people get on TV these days and argue that there's more capitalism in China, there's something wrong with us, you know. And they work hard and they save their money and they're buying up natural resources around the world, and they're not trying to take over the world militarily. But here we are, we're endlessly spending, and we have this militarism, which is a major burden too. But we're going to get to the discussion of the military in a moment, but let's bring David Bose into the conversation. He's from the Cato Institute. Did you hear anything new that you liked in these speeches?
No, nothing much new. The president said he wants to do some tax reform, get rid of the loopholes, cut out the special privileges, and lower rates. That would be a good thing to do. And both the speakers said spending is too high, the deficit is too high, we're going to do something about it. But they didn't have any specifics, and spending has soared, and they aren't talking about anything that would come close to solving that problem.
If you were giving the State of the Union, what would you have said? What do you wish they had said?
Well, I would have said some of the things Paul Ryan said. We are approaching a very dangerous point. You know, spending rose $1 trillion under President Bush before the financial crisis. Since the financial crisis, it's risen another $1 trillion in 2.5 years. So we've got a budget that's $2 trillion higher than the one Bill Clinton left to George W. Bush, and they're talking about nicking around the edges. That is insane. We have doubled federal spending in 10 years. We've increased it by $2 trillion. We need to be making major cuts, and obviously you don't have to cut the core functions of government. I'd like to cut a lot of the things the federal government does. But if you've increased it $2 trillion in 10 years, then there's a lot of stuff you could cut before you start getting to the basic safety net.
Now, one of the things we've been hearing a lot about is civility. We have to get along together. They all sat next to each other. And I don't buy this noise about how politics is too mean-spirited. We need to return to the civility of the old days. But this is just ignorance of history. Reason TV looked at the presidential race in 1800 and turned what was said then into hypothetical political ads.
John Adams is a blind, bald, crippled, toothless man who wants to start a war with France. While he's not busy importing mistresses from Europe, he's trying to marry one of his sons to a daughter of King George. Haven't we had enough? monarchy in America. If Thomas Jefferson wins, murder, robbery, rape, adultery, and incest will be openly taught and practiced. Are you prepared to see your dwellings in flames, female chastity violated, children writhing on a pike?
So it seems much calmer now. Congressman Paul, you've been an outcast. Nobody's treated you that badly, I take it.
No, not that bad, and yet I think over the years we've had way too much bipartisanship because they work together.
To spend more.
Both Republicans and Democrats, you know, both have been infiltrated by Keynesian economics, and so they follow that. And they both have the same foreign policy. They both have essentially the same monetary policy. And the Republicans haven't been good at really changing the course of history when it comes to increasing the welfare state and welfareism. So I think we eventually have to have a little bit of dissent. The only place I can see where you could cooperate and have two factions get together and say compromise is on cutting. You know, if your sacred cow is the military, and somebody else's sacred cow is the welfare, you each have to agree to cut about 50, 100, trillion, you know, $1 trillion or whatever on each side. That's the agreement that you have to have, but that isn't what happens. They have worked too well together, and they always agree to vote for each other's. You know, you vote for my deal, and I'll vote for yours. Pardon me?
Dr. Paul and David Bose, please stay with us. I'd love to know what you think about my State of the Union address, which I'll give later. But next, did you also roll your eyes when the president said after he invests in clean energy, then by the year 2035, 80% of our electricity will come from clean energy sources? I smell boondoggle, big handouts to politically connected companies and Al Gore's friends. Presidents always make these promises. It's popular to say, we'll stop using foreign oil.
This intolerable excessive dependence on foreign energy sources.
They promise
Bring us closer to energy
Independence for our country by 1980.
By 1985.
In 10 years,
by the year 2025.
So how's that working out for us? We'll talk more about that when we come back.
We know big government does not have all the answers. We know there's not a program for every problem. We know, and we have worked to give the American people a smaller, less bureaucratic government in Washington.
They did? Where was I? Since President Clinton gave that State of the Union, the federal government has passed more than 1 million pages of new rules. That's anything but a less bureaucratic government. Congressman Ron Paul is back with us, along with David Bose of the Cato Institute, and joining us now is Nicole Kurakawa from the Independent Women's Forum. So, Nicole, tonight the president said he wanted to invest, he calls it, more on education. It's our Sputnik moment. We have to catch up.
I love that he talked about education because it actually is the first annual National School Choice Week. So I would love
for... You didn't talk about choice.
Weird. It was really strange. But I think, you know, that is something that we need to talk about because education spending has gone up in this country so much, and we do not have better outcomes. So we need to start...
It's doubled since 1980, but test scores are flat.
Exactly. So we need to look at other options because all these schools that we're thinking about pouring money into sometimes they're unsafe, they have failing test scores, and he talked about merit pay, but we're not really implementing anything.
He's going to pour more money into it. What do you wish he had said?
I wish he had echoed what South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley had said in her State of the State last week, where she said, government can't be all things to all people. I also wish
that would be good if they would say that. They rarely say that.
Yeah.
I guess Paul Ryan sort of said that, but what else?
I also wish that he would cede some executive authority that his administration has expanded over the past couple of years.
Like?
For example, he has interfered in the affairs of business. We saw with General Motors. He got involved in their personnel decisions. He encouraged BP to create this escrow account. Those are decisions that are best left to private enterprise.
You would have liked him to say, gee, I was wrong, I was arrogant. This should be left to the private sector.
Right. And another big,
good luck with that.
And another big executive authority thing is the fact that he has authorized the assassination of U.S. citizens overseas. I think that is of tremendous concern, and that is not a Republican issue. That's not a Democratic issue. That is really concerning.
David Bose, what do you wish he had said?
Well, in my pipe dreams, I wish he had said, boy, I made a whole lot of mistakes. I really don't belong in this job. I'm resigning. But leaving that aside, yes, I agree. As I said earlier, that he should have talked about real spending cuts. I would like to have seen him say something precise, something firm about ending the war in Iraq that he promised when he campaigned for office he would. He's still saying we're going to be out, but you wait and see. We are not going to be out of Iraq by the end of the year. And then he said we'll start making troop withdrawals in Afghanistan. Well, we've been there for 10 years. You'd think it would be time to start. He's tripled the number of troops. I would like to have seen him say we're going to get out. And then 2 years after he came in the past 2 years, about 5 states have implemented marriage equality in their states, gay marriage. I'd like him to have said it's time to get rid of the Defense of Marriage Act and let the individual states make their own marriage laws. The federal government shouldn't tell the states whether their marriage licenses are valid.
And Congressman Paul, your turn. What would you have had him say?
Well, I would like him to change the foreign policy and say we're no longer going to be the policemen of the world and bring all our troops home from around the world. I would like to say that we don't need a welfare state. The people will be taken care of better in a different manner with free markets. But I also would have listed the number of departments that we would get rid of, and I could give you about 8 pretty easily. And then I would also talk about
energy. Give us some.
Education, energy, agriculture, homeland security, health and human services, commerce. I don't know how many that is, but that would be a good start. But the other thing that I would have said is I would get rid of the great facilitator, and the great facilitator is the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve always blames the Congress for running up debts and causing our problems. But, you know, if you didn't have a central bank creating money out of thin air to buy debt, this would be a different world. So you have to get rid of that if you want to shrink the size of government. All wars and welfare is paid for, essentially in all countries, paid for through inflation and the destruction of the currency. So that, if you just got rid of the fact that the Fed couldn't buy debt, you would shrink or at least really impede the growth of government. That would change life for all of us for the better.
And one thing he did say is that government will live within its means, but then he says within 25 years, we're going to give 80% of Americans access to high-speed rail, and you won't get a pat-down.
Oh, it's, you know, you showed just now all these presidents making these promises. We won't be dependent on foreign oil anymore, and it's all going to happen by 1980, 1985. His speech today was full of those kind of percentages. By 2025, it'll be 80%. By 2020, it'll be 80% of this. He wants the government to be micromanaging the American economy. And part of it is his envy of China. You notice that he talked about how China and India are getting more competitive, because, he said, they've started being part of the world economy because they're educating their kids earlier and longer. No, the reason China is now emerging into the world economy is because they got rid of socialism and they moved toward capitalism. It doesn't have anything to do with a longer school day.
All right, we will continue this. Thank you, panel. Stay with us. Coming up, a likely presidential candidate will join us. Someone who is a governor, vetoed lots of stuff. But when we return, we'll talk more about war.
This war was unwise, which is why I opposed it in 2002. And that is why I will bring this war to an end in 2009.
He cut the military. Dr. Paul, you want to take this?
Well, you know, we spend essentially as much as every other country in the world. We are not threatened militarily by any country at all. And all we do is we spend this money to support the military-industrial complex. It's all a political game. And what we end up doing...
Wait. It's not a game. There are people who want to murder us. And if we pull out of Afghanistan, might they regroup and have September 11th all over again?
I think if we weren't in the Middle East, there would be a lot less incentive for anybody who wanted to come over here and murder us, because anybody who's done any serious... Anybody who's done any serious study on any suicide terrorism, the #1 reason for suicide terrorism to occur is occupation. They feel utterly frustrated, angry, and willing to strike out, and they commit suicide terrorism, and that's when a foreign country occupies their land. So I would say we would be less safe. The more money we spend, the way I see it, it makes us less safe. We would be safer if we concentrated on defending our country. And our problem is that we're on a catch-22. The more we spend, the less safe we are.
We need a strong national defense. But what really threatens us now is these isolated terrorists, and that requires intelligence. It requires working with other countries around the world. It doesn't require that we spend 48% of all the money spent in the world on the military, and that's what we're doing right now. And Secretary Gates isn't talking about actually cutting. He's talking about cutting from future increases, which is all anybody in Washington ever means when they say cut a budget.
My brother's in the military, and I think the most respectful thing to do for our military is to use them wisely and to use them judiciously, but not to have them off fighting wars with no end at a tremendous cost of blood and treasure.
We do now have 50,000 soldiers in Germany, 30,000 in Japan, 10,000 in England.
Well, this is what Ron Paul was talking about. We have troops all over the world because just like here in Washington, here in the United States, where Washington thinks it should be involved in where your kids go to school and how you get your health care and your retirement and your midnight basketball, they also think that the United States government should be involved in the defense of Korea, the defense of Taiwan, the defense of Europe, against what? The Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore, and all over the Middle East from Iraq to Afghanistan. And so we want to police the world, and it is, in fact, causing more people to hate us and more people to want to destroy us.
If not we, who? We'll police the world. We'll keep
the world
safe.
Nobody has to police the world. Europe can police Europe, and the Middle East can police the Middle East. There are regional hegemons that can handle these things, and what we're doing is we're sticking our nose into other people's quarrels. We don't have to be involved in every quarrel around the world, but that's the global interventionist philosophy that both parties have been practicing in Washington for a couple of generations now, is that everything that happens anywhere in the world is a vital interest of the United States. And we ought to look again at our foreign policy and say, what is actually a vital interest of the United States? And one strong interest is not having terrorists attack us. So what we can do to prevent that is important. But occupying Afghanistan for 10 years, occupying Iraq for 8 years, that doesn't look to me like a good way to ratchet down the level of hostility to the United States in the Middle East.
Let's move on to Obamacare quickly. I happen to have a copy of it here, all 2,000 pages. The president said in his speech, the health insurance industry will stop exploiting patients. The insurance companies can't reject people with pre-existing conditions. Looked to me like both Republicans and Democrats gave him a standing ovation.
Those are applause lines. Everybody's going to applaud something like that because nobody in Washington, as Ron Paul said, nobody in Washington wants to say that there are things that are simply not the government's business. They're not authorized in the Constitution.
Healthcare?
Healthcare is not authorized in the Constitution, and healthcare is not made better by getting government bureaucracy, government bureaucrats involved in it. What Obamacare actually does is make it more difficult for insurance companies to deliver care, and that's why you see companies already getting out of the health insurance business. Remember, if you like your plan, you can keep it. Well, not if your company can't afford.
Dr. Paul, last word to you. You're a doctor. Obamacare.
Well, it will make medicine much worse, and it's going to cost a lot of money, a lot more money than now. When I first started medicine, it was before Medicare and Medicaid. And since then, every year, it seems like government gets more involved and the quality of care goes down. So we don't have any faith and confidence or understanding how services can be delivered just like you can deliver cell phones and computers and TVs. Prices go down when you let the market operate. But
and the market means the patient has to pay for most of it himself.
At least, yes, but he can buy insurance. See, this idea that we call this insurance, when you tell the insurance what the rules are and you have to accept everybody, that's not measurement of risk. and that would become welfare then.
That
but
becomes
if the
welfare. I'm sorry,
respons-
Congressman, we're out of time. Thank you very much, Congressman Paul. David Bose of the Cato Institute, Nicole Kurakawa of the Independent Women's Forum.